Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a completely mind-bending, forgotten piece of World War II history. Seriously, this one is going to challenge literally everything you think you know about wartime innovation and the dawn of global weapons.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you hear the phrase intercontinental weapon, what pops into your head? You're probably picturing, a massive metal rocket, complex computers, or a guided missile tearing through the stratosphere. But the answer to what actually was the first intercontinental weapon in history? Well, it's a historical mystery that's probably going to shock you.
Right, so most historians trace the modern era of intercontinental weapons back to the 1957 Soviet R-7 ICBM. But we actually have to rewind over a decade earlier, back to 1944, because the very first intercontinental weapon, it wasn't made of titanium, and it definitely wasn't fueled by liquid rocket propellant. Incredibly, it was a paper balloon. Yeah, a paper balloon. It was called the Fugo. Basically a massive 10-meter hydrogen balloon crafted from the most everyday organic materials you could possibly imagine. We're talking washi paper, which comes from the mulberry bush, literally glued together with Japanese potato paste. I mean, the military mobilized thousands of teenagers in high schools and sumo arenas across Japan just to laminate and paste these sheets together. The stark contrast here between this super low-tech, handmade construction and its massive intercontinental ambition, it is absolutely staggering. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll explore the retaliation motive, the engineering behind the Fugo, the sheer scale of the campaign, America's weapon of silence, the tragic human cost in Oregon, and finally, the path to reconciliation. Section 1, the retaliation motive, striking back after Doolittle. See, the Japanese military accelerated the Fugo project because they wanted to strike the American home front in direct retaliation for the 1942 Doolittle raid. But there was a major problem. They lacked traditional bombers with the range to actually cross the Pacific. So, how do you cross that vast ocean? Well, Japanese scientists looked up to the atmosphere. They planned to harness a newly mapped, incredibly powerful meteorological phenomenon called the jet stream. Discovered by Japanese scientist Wasaburo Oishi back in the 1920s, these high-altitude, fast-flowing air currents whip from west to east at staggering speeds, up to 200 miles per hour during the winter. Meteorologists calculated that if a balloon could catch a ride on this current, it could cross the entire ocean in just 30 to 100 hours. Which brings us to Section 2, Engineering the Fugo, Navigating the Pacific. Now, what's really interesting about this is how they kept it in the air. Launching a balloon is easy. Keeping it airborne for thousands of miles across a freezing ocean, that requires some brilliant engineering. To solve this, they built a completely mechanical altitude control system. Since it's a fixed-volume balloon, the daytime sun heats it up, the hydrogen expands, and to keep the paper from popping, a valve vents the gas. But when night falls, the temperature drops, the balloon cools, and suddenly it threatens to fall right into the ocean. So engineers wired aneroid barometers to gunpowder plugs. Whenever the balloon dropped too low, the barometer triggered a tiny explosion to drop a sandbag. Now lighter, the balloon rises back up. It was this incredibly ingenious, completely automated dance of venting gas and dropping sand to stay perfectly positioned in the jet stream. But we absolutely cannot forget that this was a weapon, and its payload was deadly. Each carriage held 4 5-kilogram thermite incendiary bombs and 1 15-kilogram high-explosive anti-personnel bomb. The main strategic objective here was to drop these incendiaries over the dense forests of the American Pacific Northwest, ignite massive, uncontrollable wildfires, and ultimately trigger widespread civilian panic across the United States. Section 3. Scale of the campaign. Ambition versus reality. To put this massive plan into action, the Japanese army set up vast launch operations on the coast of Honshu. And the scale of this is simply astounding. 9,300. That's how many Fugo balloons were assembled, filled with hydrogen, and launched by 30-man crews between November 1944 and April 1945. However, the reality fell drastically short of the ambition. Out of those 9,300 launched, an overwhelming majority, about 9,000 balloons, were lost at sea or just went completely undetected. Only around 300 were ever actually found or observed in North America, landing anywhere from Alaska all the way down to Mexico, and even as far east as Michigan. But why did the campaign largely fail to ignite those massive forest fires? Well, the irony is that the jet stream is strongest in the winter, right? Which also happens to be the wettest, snowiest time of the year in the Pacific Northwest. The forests were simply too damp and covered in snow to catch fire.
Moving on to Section 4, the weapon of silence, America's counter tactic.
The U.S. government quickly recognized the danger, but their homeland defense relied less on fighter planes and a whole lot more on brilliant counter-espionage. They initiated a massive media blackout. The U.S. Office of Censorship basically ordered newspapers and radio broadcasters to stay completely silent about any balloon sightings. Just listen to this 1945 memo sent to the press. Quote, "There is no question that your refusal to publish has baffled the Japanese, annoyed and hindered them, and has been an important contribution to security." And you know what? This tactic worked flawlessly. Because they heard zero reports of fires or panic in the U.S. media, Japanese generals just assumed the balloons were failing to cross the ocean. Totally frustrated and running out of resources, they completely abandoned the project in April 1945.
Section 5, Tragedy in Oregon, the human cost. Sadly, the end of the launches did not mean the end of the danger on American soil. Because of that exact media blackout we just talked about, the American public had absolutely no idea these bombs were falling from the sky. On the morning of May 5, 1945, near Bly, Oregon, Reverend Archie Mitchell took his pregnant wife Elsie and 5 children from his Sunday school class for a picnic in the Fremont National Forest. While Reverend Mitchell was parking the car, Elsie and the kids, who were just 11 to 14 years old, were exploring the woods. They stumbled upon a downed balloon on the ground. Tragically, moments later, the anti-personnel bomb attached to it detonated.
Elsie Mitchell and those 5 children, Edward, Jay, Dick, Joan, and Sherman, were killed instantly. 6 lives lost. Those 6 individuals were the only mainland U.S. civilian casualties of World War II from direct enemy action. It is a profoundly heartbreaking footnote in the history of the war.
Section 6, Legacy and Reconciliation, Healing the Wounds.
Let's look at how the communities and these 2 nations navigated the aftermath. The decades that followed brilliantly illustrate the resilience of the human spirit. In 1950, a stone monument was erected right at the site of the tragedy. Then, jumping to 1987, Japanese women who had actually been drafted as schoolgirls to build those very Fugo balloons sent 1,000 folded paper cranes to the victims' families as a profound gesture of peace. By 1995, Japanese cherry trees were planted at the site for the 50th anniversary. And amazingly, during the massive 2021 bootleg fire, modern firefighters literally went out of their way to wrap the monument in fire-resistant material, saving this crucial piece of history. And this brilliantly illustrates how the site transformed from a forgotten scar of war into a protected, living symbol of international peace.
So, we reach the end of our explainer with a vital question to leave you with. How do we measure the unintended human costs of long-distance warfare and the enduring power of reconciliation? From a low-tech paper balloon floating silently across the jet stream to a quiet, hallowed forest in Oregon, the ripples of this history are absolutely still relevant today. Thank you so much for diving into this incredible story with me on The Explainer, and never stop exploring the history hidden all around you.